Paul's first letter to the Corinthians, chapter 10. Now, I would not have you ignorant, brothers, that our fathers were all under the cloud, and all passed through the sea, and were baptized into Moses in the cloud and in the sea, and all ate the same spiritual food, and all drank the same spiritual drink, for they drank of a spiritual rock that followed them, and the rock was Christ. However, with most of them God was not well pleased, for they were overthrown in the wilderness. Now these things were our examples, to the intent we should not lust after evil things as they also lusted. Don't be idolaters as some of them were. As it is written, the people sat down to eat and drink and rose up to play. Let's not commit sexual immorality as some of them committed, and in one day 23,000 fell. Let's not test Christ as some of them tested and perished by the serpents. Don't grumble as some of them also grumbled and perished by the destroyer. Now all these things happened to them by way of example, and they were written for our admonition, on whom the ends of the ages have come. Therefore, let him who thinks he stands be careful that he doesn't fall. No temptation has taken you except what is common to man. God is faithful, who will not allow you to be tempted above what you are able, but will with the temptation also make the way of escape, that you may be able to endure it. Therefore, my beloved, flee from idolatry. I speak as to wise men. Judge what I say. The cup of blessing which we bless, isn't it a sharing of the blood of Christ? The bread which we break, isn't it a sharing of the body of Christ? Because there is one loaf of bread, we who are many are one body, for we all partake of the one loaf of bread. Consider Israel according to the flesh. Don't those who eat the sacrifices participate in the altar? What am I saying then? That a thing sacrificed to idols is anything? Or that an idol is anything? But I say the things which the Gentiles sacrifice, they sacrifice to demons and not to God. And I don't desire that you would have fellowship with demons. You can't both drink the cup of the Lord and the cup of demons. You can't both partake of the table of the Lord and of the table of demons. Or do we provoke the Lord to jealousy? Are we stronger than he? All things are lawful for me, but not all things are profitable. All things are lawful for me, but not all things build up. Let no one seek his own, but each one his neighbor's good. Whatever is sold in the butcher shop, eat, asking no question for the sake of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's, and its fullness. But if one of those who don't believe invites you to a meal, and you are inclined to go, eat whatever is set before you, asking no questions for the sake of conscience. But if anyone says to you, "This was offered to idols," don't eat it for the sake of the one who told you, and for the sake of conscience. For the earth is the Lord's, with all its fullness. Conscience, I say, not your own, but the other's conscience. For why is my liberty judged by another's conscience? If I partake with thankfulness, why am I denounced for something I give thanks for? Whether, therefore, you eat or drink, or whatever you do all to the glory of God. Give no occasion for stumbling, whether to Jews, to Greeks, or to the assembly of God. Even as I also please all men in all things, not seeking my own profit, but the profit of the many, that they may be saved. By this point, Paul has spent the last few chapters making a careful argument about Christian freedom, and when we need to set that freedom aside for the sake of others. Now in chapter 10, he drives the point home with a warning that might be the most sobering in the whole letter, and he does it by taking the Corinthians back to a story they all knew, the Exodus. Paul starts by drawing a direct line between the Corinthians and the generation of Israelites who escaped Egypt. Think about what that generation had going for them. God led them personally, a pillar of cloud by day, a pillar of fire by night. They walked through the parted Red Sea. He fed them miraculously with manna from heaven. He brought water out of a solid rock. And they were, in a very real sense, a people with every spiritual advantage. And then Paul says, God was not pleased with most of them. In fact, many of them died in the wilderness over those 40 years. Not because they lacked blessings, but because they kept turning back to the things they'd been delivered from. Idolatry, immorality, grumbling against God, testing his patience one too many times. Paul's making a pointed connection. The Corinthians, just like those Israelites, had come out of a culture soaked in idol worship. They'd been rescued from it. They'd received enormous spiritual blessings, baptism, the Eucharist, the gifts of the Holy Spirit, but some of them were drifting back toward the orbit of idolatry without even fully realizing it. And Paul says, be careful. Look what happened to them. Imagine someone who's been through rehab and genuinely gotten clean. They have support, a new community, a real fresh start. But over time, they start hanging around the old crowd, not necessarily using again, but just around, just nearby, telling themselves it's fine because they've changed. Now, anyone who loves them is going to sound the alarm, because proximity to the thing you were delivered from is never as safe as it feels. That's Paul's warning to Corinth. But Paul doesn't leave them in despair. He makes sure they hear this. God never allows a temptation to come to us that it's impossible for us to survive. He always provides a way through or a way out. St. John Chrysostom, preaching on this very passage, pointed out that this isn't a small comfort, it's a fundamental promise about who God is. Chrysostom wrote that even with temptations that seem manageable, we still cannot get through them by our own power. We require God's help even for the ordinary ones, but God is always faithful. He gives patience and brings on a speedy release, as Chrysostom put it, so that in the end, even the hardest temptation becomes bearable through his help. That's worth sitting with for a minute. There's no situation the Corinthians or us will ever face where the only option is to give in. That exit always exists. The question is whether or not we're looking for it. So what does Paul actually tell them to do about idolatry? He doesn't say to be careful around it. He doesn't say, use your discernment. He says, flee. Run from it. Chrysostom also noticed the exact word Paul chose here and pointed out that Paul didn't simply say, depart from idols. He says, flee. He calls the matter idolatry and no longer bids them quit it merely on account of the injury to their neighbor, but signifies that the very thing of itself is sufficient to bring a great destruction. And that's the same instinct Paul sees in Joseph, who, when a woman tried to seduce him, didn't stop to calculate his options or trust his own willpower. He turned and literally ran out of the house, leaving his cloak behind. No negotiation, no lingering. That's Paul's model for how to handle anything connected to idolatry. Think about the difference between someone who slowly backs away from the edge of a cliff versus someone who sprints in the opposite direction. Both of them might end up safe, but one of them is treating the edge like it's negotiable and the other one isn't. Paul wants the Corinthians to be the sprinter, not the person who thinks they can get just a little closer and it'll still be okay. And here's something Paul says that often gets missed. He's not overly worried about the carved statues themselves. He agrees with the Corinthians that a man-made idol has no real power. But behind the idol, there are demons. And when someone participates in idol worship, sits at the table, eats the food, joins the ritual, they're making a real spiritual connection, even if they don't intend to. Paul puts this in stark contrast with the Eucharist. When Christians share the bread and the cup of Christ, they are truly connected to Him. Not just symbolically, but actually connected. In the same way, to sit at an idol table is to make a real, even if unwanted, spiritual connection to what's behind it. Paul's question is blunt. Do you want to provoke the Lord to jealousy? Do you think you are stronger than he is? The Catechism of the Catholic Church makes it clear just how serious this is still taken. It teaches that idolatry is not just an ancient problem, it remains a constant temptation to faith, and that someone commits idolatry whenever they honor and revere anything, power, pleasure, money, status, even a person, in the place that belongs to God alone. The idol doesn't have to be carved of stone to be real. Then Paul gets back to the practical question. What about food offered to idols? If a Christian goes to the market and buys meat, do they need to interrogate the butcher about its origin? If they're invited to a friend's house for dinner, should they demand a full theological audit for the meal? No, Paul says, don't be paranoid. The earth belongs to the Lord and everything in it. Meat is just meat. If you don't know whether it was offered to an idol, eat freely and give thanks. But here's the catch. If someone points it out to you, if it becomes a known, visible thing, then for the sake of others who are watching, don't eat it. Not because the meat suddenly became dangerous, but because what others see you doing either draws them toward Christ or creates confusion about where your loyalties lie. Imagine you're trying to help a friend quit smoking, and one day you casually light up next to him. You might not be trying to tempt them, but the effect is real, regardless of your intent. Paul is asking the Corinthians and us to factor in the effect of our visible choices on the people around us, especially the people still finding their footing in faith. So in the end, chapter 10 gives us 3 things to hold on to. First, a warning from history. Spiritual blessings don't automatically protect us from spiritual failure if we keep flirting with the things we were delivered from. Second thing is a promise. God always provides a way through temptation. We're never trapped. And the third thing, a standard for Christian freedom. Not what can I get away with, but will this glorify God and will it build up others? So here's the question I'll leave you with today. Are there things we've allowed back into our lives? Maybe habits, environments, relationships, ways of spending our time or attention. Things that we know from experience that we should be running from instead of trying to manage. Am I genuinely looking for God's way of escape? Or have we convinced ourselves that we don't need the help